Pnawn da bawb, John Williams dwi, Cadeirydd Iechyd Cyhoeddus Cymru. Mae'n bleser gennyf gadeiro Gwebinar heddiw. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Williams. I'm Chair of Public Health Wales, and it's my great pleasure to chair this afternoon's webinar on the cost of living crisis, how to protect people's health and save lives. I just have some housekeeping details before we get underway. We are recording the session, and that's going to be available after the event in the following week. And delegates will have a link for any PowerPoint presentations. So can we please ask delegates if you'll keep your microphones on mute and keep your cameras off for the duration of the event, but of course, please switch them on if you want to ask the panel a question at the end. Can you please send your questions in via the chat function? All the questions will be visible to everyone on Zoom. And if you want to tweet about the event, then please do using @WelshConfed and also the hashtag Wellbeing for Wales. And of course, this is the latest in the Welsh NHS Confederation Wellbeing for Wales series, and we couldn't be concluding the year on a more important subject. Cost of living crisis is already having and is going to have a significant impact on people's livelihoods and well-being. And of course, it comes at a time when we're facing multiple challenges: COVID-19 recovery, concerns about climate change, war in Europe. All these things are interconnected. And the cost of living crisis is now part of our day-to-day conversations, both in our personal lives and our working lives, whether we're discussing fuel bills, debt, or thinking about how we support our communities and our population. And we're also regularly now talking about warm banks, a term we'd not heard of a year ago, and the issues in the news on a daily basis. Today, the BBC has a story about how schools are supporting families to clean children's school clothes and help them shower so they can continue to attend. And organisations like Citizens Advice Cymru have seen a huge rise in demand for advice and support on areas including homelessness, rent arrears, council tax debt, and energy bills. The basics in life for a warm home and a meal are becoming so difficult for so many people. And the cost of living crisis also comes on the back of very high poverty levels, as we know, and we're a country of widespread poverty. 31% of children in Wales, that's 190,000 children, are living in poverty. And there's a whole host of data in the Public Health Outcomes Framework, which we published yesterday on the 15th of December, which is indicating premature deaths from non-communicable diseases and suicides in Wales are both rising compared in the most deprived areas compared to the least. So those already in poverty are going to experience even more adverse effects than the rest of us. And of course, a single organisation can't address the cost of living crisis alone. It's only through partnership and integrated working that we can make a difference, and that we need to go back to the foundations laid out by the Future Generations Act to help us through. And we have 4 experts this afternoon who are going to talk us through all the issues, and then we can ask them questions at the end. So it's my pleasure to begin by introducing Sumina Azam. Sumina is a consultant in public health medicine. She's head of policy and the deputy director of policy and international health in Public Health Wales under our World Health Organization Collaborating Centre on Investment for Health and Wellbeing. A very long title, I know, but Sumina discharges every aspect of that with distinction. And she's going to talk us through all the findings and recommendations from our recent report, and then look at the longer health and well-being implications of the cost of living crisis. Croeso mawr, Sumina, warm welcome, Sumina, and drosodd i chi. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Jan, for the introduction. So I'm going to do a presentation based on the key findings from a report we published last month. So the aim of the report is to provide a framework for thinking about how the cost of living crisis will affect our population, not only making people poorer, but affecting their health, both in the short term and long term, and widening health inequalities. So we've used a public health lens to identify actions to protect and promote health and well-being of people, outlining what a public health approach to the cost of living crisis could look like in the short, medium and longer term. So at the heart of the cost of living crisis is wages and welfare payments that aren't keeping up with inflation and therefore living costs. So in the report, we've included figures about inflation, but as the situation has already changed, I thought it'd be helpful to include two graphs with data published in the last 2 weeks. So firstly, on the graph, in the graph on the left-hand side, this was published by the ONS yesterday. This shows CPI inflation figures for the past 2 years, and it paints a truly stark picture, as you can see. So inflation figures are at a 40-year high. The latest CPI inflation rate is 10.7%. The graph also shows how different categories of goods and services have contributed to the overall inflation rate. So the largest contributions are from households and household services. So these are electricity, gas and other fuels, and that's the green/teal colour. Food and non-alcoholic drinks is the navy blue colour, and the 12-month inflation rate is 16.4%. And we have all seen this when we go shopping. And transport, just the cost of catching a train or driving our own cars, the price of that's the purple bar. And we've all seen how that's gone up as well. However, the story isn't complete without us thinking about inequalities. And the cost of living crisis whilst the cost of living crisis has the potential to affect everybody, those who are already worst off are those who are being hardest hit. So worst off households have less flexibility in their budget to respond to rising prices. And this is shown in the graph on the right-hand side. So this is from Public Health Scotland, and it summarises inflation rates for different income groups in the UK, with the lowest income on the left. Now, it's got two things on here. It's got with the energy price guarantee in place, which is the blue line, and without the energy price guarantee, which is the purple line. And if we hadn't had the energy price guarantee, inflation would have ranged from nearly 23% for the lowest income group to nearly 15% for the highest income group. The energy price guarantee has made a difference and reduced inflation, but the underlying picture is that really those who are poorest are being hardest hit. So behind these graphs is impact on people, and the cost of living crisis is pushing people who are just about coping to a state of struggling or crisis. Now, this figure is showing the results from a tracker survey with data for Wales, and it looks at households which are classified into 4 financial wellbeing categories. At the top, you've got data from October 2021, so before the cost of living crisis, and this shows that 30% of people in Wales were struggling or in serious difficulties. However, in June of this year, this increased to 45%. This is a huge difference. And on the other side, previously, whilst 1 in 3 felt financially secure, in June, this changed to less than 1 in 4. So what's most worrying about all of this is that household finances, even through COVID, were fairly secure. However, things changed rapidly this summer. So what does this actually mean for people? Now, a survey from August shows that just over 60% were saying that they were spending less on non-essentials. About half the population said they were spending less on gas and electricity at home. And I think that if we asked people right now, this figure would be much, much higher. And even more worryingly, 45% over the summer months were saying that they were spending less on food and shopping essentials. So the World Health Organization has identified 5 building blocks, or what they called essential conditions for a healthy life, which are outlined on the left-hand side. And these account for about half the health gap in Wales between the richest and poorest population groups in Wales. And the cost of living crisis is going to affect all of these. It's going to affect all the building blocks for health. And it basically means that the crisis will truly be a health equity issue. There's also a risk of widening geographic inequalities. So for example, between rural and urban areas. So rural areas are more dependent on private cars for work, for transport, for social interactions. If you live in a rural area, the housing stock is much worse, it's less energy efficient, therefore particularly causing you to be affected by the high energy costs. And a significant proportion of those living in rural properties rely on LPG, which is more expensive. Rural areas are also more dependent on small and medium businesses, and they're also less likely to be able to withstand any economic shocks. So the poverty and financial insecurity impacts on health can be seen across a lifetime, and they can be handed down between generations. So for example, if you have children who experience poor nutrition or poor educational attainment, this will have lifelong impacts for them. So in the report, we've gone so far as to say that the cost of living crisis is a public health emergency. So if you cut back on essentials, this has both a direct and indirect effect on physical, mental health and well-being. And this diagram illustrates the breadth of ways that cost of living crisis will affect people. So at an individual level, for example, increased costs reduce energy use in the home, leading to cold homes, increased vulnerability to a range of physical, mental well-being impacts, and, for example, could result in worsening excess winter deaths. Households also face multiple challenges at the same time. It's not just one thing, and all of these things compound each other and make each other worse. And there are also effects at a system level. So it's not just individuals, it's businesses, it's communities, it's services, and basically it's widening social inequity. So what we're looking at is more than just a short-term economic squeeze. We're looking at a long-term public health issue. Public Health Scotland has just published a health impact assessment that provides an additional layer of evidence that we need to consider. And the report highlights how our response shouldn't just be about meeting survival needs of people, but recognises that everybody has the right to a dignified life and the right to participate in society. So, for example, children should be able to do extracurricular activities. However, poverty is going to lock them out of this opportunity, and the impacts may be felt for the rest of their lives. The report also identifies some population groups that are likely to be disproportionately affected, and these are very similar to the groups that we were concerned about during the pandemic. Now, on the right-hand side is a graph, and what it looks at is the drop in income, how a drop in income will affect life expectancy. And this is a sustained drop in income, and it looks at 3 scenarios, but I'll summarize because there's a lot in this graph. But basically, it's saying that the energy price guarantee and the cost of living support have helped. But despite all of these, there will be a drop in life expectancy. And basically, those who are the poorest will die earlier as a result. So as this is a public health problem, we do need a public health response. And this diagram summarizes some of the public health principles that can help us. So as the negative impacts of the cost of living crisis are exacerbating existing vulnerabilities, we need to be able to prioritize preventative action with a focus on addressing the underlying causes of poor health. Evidence and data can also help us to understand the issue, both as it is now, but also how it could evolve in the future. And we know that we can't do this without working with partners, both the wider system and with communities. So in the report, we provide a framework of priority areas for action. We recognise the need to mitigate harms and the immediate threats of the cost of living crisis to those who are most hardest hit. However, we also need to ensure that we are laying the foundations for the type of society we want to live in. And we would suggest that that's a healthier society and a more equal society. The cost of living crisis requires urgent action in response, both in the short, medium and longer term. So in the short term, we need to be thinking across a breadth of areas where there are immediate harms. So for example, looking at fuel and food prices, looking at stretched public services. We need to think about how we can prevent homelessness, promote healthy eating and support mental well-being. We also know that actions to maximise income, particularly for the lowest earners, will benefit health and well-being. So in view of further anticipated falls in household disposable income and rising poverty levels and subsequent longer-term impacts on health and well-being, it's important that we look beyond the short term. So some examples of medium to longer term responses include housing energy efficiency measures, improving housing availability, affordability, quality, encouraging active low carbon travel options, and promoting fair work. So with longer term impacts on health and health inequalities anticipated, it's important that we act to support and protect people in the longer term, which means creating a healthier and more equal society. We have those policies in Wales, the wellbeing of future generations, like the socio-economic duty. We've got so many enabling legislations that put health and wellbeing at the heart of decision making. We can build societies and communities that support health, and that involves building community resilience, thinking about an economy of wellbeing, which is basically where we prioritise wellbeing as part of our economic decisions. We also need to consider all of our population, from the very young to the very old. However, we know that to tackle inequalities, we need to really think about the early years. In the report, we also provide a brief overview of our organisational response to the cost of living crisis, the how we are responding. And we know that we can't respond and tackle the cost of living crisis on our own. We need to work with partners. So working with voluntary sector is absolutely key. And we do that as part of our work, but we know that that's an area we need to maximise opportunities for health and wellbeing. Public Health Wales is also part of a health and care system, and our response needs to be part of that too. So, for example, NHS organisations could look at their role as part of a foundational economy to support their local communities. A core part of our work is data, research and intelligence, and we've done work in this space on the cost of living already. So, for example, my colleague early in August this year did a horizon scanning report looking at learning from other countries and previous crises. We also have a data dashboard that helps us to understand in real time the impact the crisis is having on health and wellbeing. We also have a cost of living survey that is due to start shortly, which is finding out firsthand how the crisis is affecting our population's health and wellbeing. And we also know that we have to support our staff and our service users, and looking after our staff is key. So like many of you, actions are underway in terms of supporting staff to access the financial support. Yeah. Thank you. And we also know that colleagues in screening have been supporting their service users, for example, looking at how to minimise travel distances or how to signpost to services that are available to them to help them through this crisis. And we also know that we need to utilise the policy levers available to us, which are the mechanisms through which we can affect change. So we are facing an immensely difficult winter, and the situation is likely to remain challenging for a few years ahead. What we really hope is that some of the evidence we've collated will help others in their response too. So thank you very much.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Samina. Thank you very much, Samina. And you've got our webinar off to a very powerful start, really indicating that this is a long-term societal public health emergency. I'm sure that delegates to the webinar will be thinking about questions for you, to which we'll come back when the panel convenes. Diolch yn fawr iawn eto. So let's turn now to Peter Matuszek, who's the head of analysis at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. And Peter leads the team that's the guardians of the JRF evidence on poverty. And as such, he's interested in all elements of poverty measurement and is passionate about making sure that analysis has impact and that a JRF monitoring strategy and research reports make a big difference. So Peter joined JRF from the civil service, where he'd spent 20 years really working on a number of issues around poverty analysis and policies in the Department of Work and Pensions. And he's been focused on measurement for persistent poverty, child poverty, and that links back to my earlier point about the fact that we have 190,000 children in Wales living in poverty. So he's going to give us an overview of JRF's research and policy work in this field. So croeso mawr, Peter, a very warm welcome to Wales this afternoon, Peter, and I hand over to you.
Thank you. I'm hoping that you can see the slides okay. If you can't, then just say. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk a bit about where we are, what's been happening to incomes at the lowest end of the society, what the impact of the cost of living crisis has had, and then I'll talk a bit about what can be done about it. I mean, there's just a couple of warnings to start with. One is, obviously, it is a bleak picture. I think all of the presentations will tell the seriousness of the issues that we're facing. So just to be aware of that. I'm also an analyst, so I love a good chart. So you'll have a lot of charts in front of you. I'll try and explain what they all mean. And thirdly, most of our data covers the UK. I've got one slide on the situation in Wales, but I'm really pleased that Samina has been able to give a picture of the position in Wales as well. So with that caveats out the way. So yes, as I say, what I wanted to come on to is say that we came into the crisis in a bad shape. Following the coronavirus crisis, then the cost of living crisis. There's been a set of crises, but even before then, things were pretty bad. The cost of living crisis is hitting those hardest at the bottom, and government action and action from across society is needed. So I think for all of us, it's sort of what can we do to mitigate this cost of living crisis and make sure that the future that we sort of face after that is as good as possible. So here's the situation in Wales. In the latest child poverty data. So the latest child poverty data, the latest poverty data is affected by coronavirus. So the data quality isn't as good as we would normally have. But the sort of bad news is that you'll see that basically the darker the purple, the worse, sort of the higher the rates of poverty. And in both the overall poverty rate on the left-hand side and on the child poverty rate on the right-hand side, you'll see that Wales tends to be more purple than some of the other countries, particularly Scotland and Northern Ireland. So that's something to be aware of when I talk about UK statistics. Normally, there's also a kind of a gradient by poverty levels as well. So all of the kind of UK statistics I'm presenting in the rest of the slide pack are probably going to be marginally worse for Wales, I would hazard a guess. And so what has happened since before the pandemic? So basically we had a decade of rising deep poverty. So the chart here, the line that's going up is deep poverty, and the blue line that's staying about the same, which isn't a good story, it's just sort of stagnant, is overall poverty. So we've had sort of 20 years of rising deep poverty and stagnant overall poverty. And why is that? Well, partly because the basic rate of benefits compared to inflation is at the lowest level for 40 years. And therefore we see rising destitution and increasing food bank use, and even the sort of very harsh edges of destitution, of rough sleeping, doubling over the last decade. So who has poverty been deepening for? Lone parents, large families, disabled people, workless families, and people with ethnic minority backgrounds. I've got a slide on that on the next slide. But basically, these are groups that have been most badly affected by changes to the welfare system. So there's been a series of cuts and freezes to benefit rates, which is why they've lagged so far behind inflation to the extent that they're the lowest for 40 years. There's also the 2-child limit, which will affect large families disproportionately, obviously, but also all families in receipt of benefits will have seen their benefit rates sort of fall relative to inflation. In terms of the ethnicity picture, you can see basically very large disparities. So the whole length of the bar is overall poverty, and the purple bit is very deep poverty. And you can see basically over half of families headed by someone of Bangladeshi ethnicity are in poverty, nearly half of Pakistani families, and about 1 in 5 white families. So there's a real big disparity, probably slightly less disparity, but still massive disparities in deep poverty. So over 1 in 5 families headed by someone of Bangladeshi ethnicity are in deep poverty, compared to just under 1 in 10 families headed by someone of white ethnicity. So and we think that's partly due to kind of labour market differences, but also the kind of benefits changes that I mentioned earlier. And what is the impact of poverty? Well, obviously, I think you'll all see it in your day-to-day work. But basically, this is something called the GHQ 12 scale, and from something called Understanding Society. And basically, each of these are the 12 sort of measures of mental health. And basically, there's 5 bars. The blue bar is the lowest fifth of incomes, and then the kind of bottom bar, sort of grey-green, is the highest quintile. And basically, you can see for all of those characteristics of mental health, there's a massive gradient. And Samina also showed you the massive gradient in terms of, actual life expectancy and so forth. So there is definitely a very steep health gradient to being low income. And Samina's put an extra data point on this chart, but basically we can see that inflation basically has been rocketing. It's still above 10%. The data published earlier this week, that's the 4th out of 5 months it's been over 10%. And even the OBR forecasts this to come down very, very sharply, but that's just prices stopping rising so quickly. They aren't falling, so they'll still be at the very high levels. And so it's, even when inflation's down to 2% and maybe some people have moved off to other topics, that's actually 2% on top of the massive increases that we've already seen. And so that's something to bear in mind. And basically the 10% benefit increase that you'll see in April is to kind of catch up, because when benefits are uprated, the kind of inflation rate that was used was about 3.1%. And so you've had sort of, since that announcement, you've sort of seen the inflation so much higher, that just means that the benefits were uprated massively insufficiently to cope with inflation. So this 10% increase in April is basically a little bit of catching up, but equally, as inflation continues to be quite high, there'll still be a bit of catching up needing next year. And in the meantime, your families in receipt of benefits will have to be paying the kind of very high prices that we're seeing in the shops now. So the next few slides are a bit about a cost of living survey that we did in the end of October, beginning of November of this year. So very kind of up-to-date information. We only published it on Wednesday, so you're seeing it hot off the press. And it's a sample size of 4,000 people across the UK, and it's the third time we've done this survey. So we did it first in September and October of last year, then over the summer, and then in October and November. So we're able to do a time series and see how things have changed over time. And I think you'll probably be guessing already sort of what the direction of that change is likely to be. So what does the survey cover? It covers whether someone's in arrears, whether they've got a high cost loan, whether they're going without essentials. And so the essentials we're talking about are food insecurity. So that means in the last month or so, someone's either cut down on the size of their meals or skipped meals because there wasn't enough money, or have been hungry but did not have enough money for food. And then there's a set of other essentials, which I think hopefully we'll all agree are essentials. So not having a suitable clothing, not being able to repair a major electrical good, not going without a shower or bath, basic toiletries, cold home, unfurnished home, not being able to go to the dentist, not being able to get prescriptions, or visiting a food bank, or not making an essential journey. And so we are basically looking at the bottom 40% of households here. So we don't ask everybody, we just sort of try and focus on the bottom end of the income distribution, those in the bottom 40%, so the bottom 4 in 10. But we see really stark results. So over 7 million were going about essentials in the second half of the year. 4 in 10 of that group were in arrears with at least one bill. There's an increase in every bill that we looked at except energy, which shows that government action can make a difference. There's quite a big combination of going without essentials and an arrears of bills, as you might expect. Massive kind of food insecurity for this group in the last month, and massive kind of cold homes, which obviously looking out the window with ice and snow is something that's deeply worrying at the moment. And it's some of the same groups as that were in deepest poverty are facing the harshest effects of the cost of living crisis. It's not sort of calculus to believe that. So households on universal credit, low-income private renters, and young adults in low-income households are 3 of the groups we picked out that have got where basically it was high and it's getting a lot higher. So looking at sort of basically here we're already just looking at the bottom 40% income distribution. The two bars on the left are the bottom 20%, and then the two bars on the right are the next 20% of the income distribution. And what you can see is basically the bottom 20% of the income distribution we're already doing worse, as you'd expect, because they've got lower incomes, but all of the increase since May have been for those with the lowest incomes. So you can see how the cost of living affects the poorest the worst. And basically, again, just some really stark numbers. And basically, you've got over half of the bottom 20% of household incomes being behind with at least one bill, a third being having a high cost credit loan, and about a quarter have been, almost robbing Peter to pay Paul. Using a credit card to pay bills is obviously not sustainable in the long term, and particularly before kind of high winter bills come in. So that's again very worrying, particularly for the poorest households. Basically, the purple bits on these ones are the proportion of universal credit recipients going without essentials in our survey or being in arrears. And basically, you can see, almost the whole of the pie charts are swallowed up by the purple blocks. And it's even higher for those who are getting deductions from their universal credit to pay for the gas bill or pay for the 5-week advance, up to 95%, already going without essentials. So basically, if you meet someone on universal credit, they're almost certainly going without one of those essentials that I mentioned earlier. We're going the wrong way. And then there's a tenure mix, so high housing costs, private renters and social renters have seen going over essentials increase, as is owner occupiers, and obviously we're worried about increasing mortgage rates, and again worried about kind of security of tenure with private renters and social renters seeing a lot of sort of high proportions with problems with their rents. Big gradient by young people, a big gradient of going about essentials and being in arrears. Again, sort of there's going to be a financial scarring, so lots of kind of risky sort of savings behaviours and increases in that category, which obviously these people have to pay these back and sort of storing up problems for the future. So what are the kind of drivers? And I'll come on to sort of what's been done by the UK government. So some of the drivers are, we think, expensive housing and other costs, inadequate social security, relationships and family pressures, and then low paid insecure work. All of those things kind of contribute to the experience of being in poverty. And I think the kind of cost of living crisis kind of tightens those vices on people even further. So what was the government support package for 2022? Well, you can see it listed in front of you. So a series of kind of one-off kind of emergency payments, which I think were welcome and very, very necessary given the fact that benefits hadn't increased by nearly enough. But in our latest analysis, there was still a gap of 450 on average this year for people on means tested benefits. So despite all of these, despite all of these one-off payments, there was still a gap. We were quite welcoming of some of the elements of the autumn statement. So benefits were uprated with inflation, as they should always be, and there were further top-ups of one-off benefits. It is a bit kind of random, though. It's just to means tested benefit recipients. So one of the things that I would say to anybody who's public facing is to try and get people to take up the benefits that they are entitled to, because even if you're only entitled to a small amount of benefits, you get all of these kind of one-off payments as well. But it's still not enough. Rates of benefits is still close to its lowest level. No new support for the winter when it's very cold outside, and social rents are going up as well. I think one of the things that I always want to put in a presentation is that you can be blinded by statistics, but what we try and do is also talk to people who are experiencing poverty and think about, well, what do they think needs to happen? And
1 minute.
thinking about making sure they have help wherever they live, reaching out to people who are most vulnerable through services that are being accessed, which I think hopefully some people on the call will be manning those services to make sure they're helped as best as possible. So to my final slide, so we think that there is a gap over the winter that needs to be filled, particularly with the cold weather. So we're calling for another one-off payment between now and the benefits going up in April. We do think that the universal credit, just the basic rate, isn't high enough, so that needs to increase. We need to make sure actual housing support matches the housing need. And we want, as I say, a big benefit take-up push, not just for pension credit, but for all working age benefits as well, and to stop this unaffordable debt collection practices by government. That the fact that every universal claimant credit claimant is going without essentials virtually is just not right. So that's my presentation. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Diolch yn fawr, Peter. Thank you very much, Peter. And you've really used your big data charts to bring home to all of us just the impact this is going to have, and how those already in poverty will be the worst hit. And that, of course, is going to increase and exacerbate the health inequalities we already have in this country. Diolch yn fawr. We turn now to Helen Twiddle, who's the Health and Social Care Policy and Campaigns Officer for Age Cymru, and Helen has been with them coming up to 2 years, leading on the health and social care policy and campaigns work, previously working for Welsh Women's Aid as a services development officer. And Helen is going to give us some insight into how the cost of living crisis is impacting on a particular population group, older people, and the support that Age Cymru is providing, and really the solutions and the recommendations that Age Cymru is making for the UK and Welsh Government. P'nawn da, Helen. Good afternoon, Helen. Drosodd i
Good
chi.
afternoon.
Over to
Thank
you.
you, Jan. Thank you. Can everyone see my screen? Because it always looks a bit weird on this situation. I hope you can see that. So I'm Helen Twiddle. I've been with Age Cymru for a couple of years now, and I'm going to talk to you specifically about the effects on older people. Just a little bit of background about Age Cymru. We are the national organisation working with local partners across Wales. We provide advice services, dementia advocacy services, Hope, which is helping people participate and engage, which is a volunteer-led services, and provide physical and mental wellbeing services. We work hard to gather the views and lived experiences of older people across Wales through all of these projects. And Age Cymru Advice is our flagship services. Oh, I've gone too far forward, but never mind. People can access our services. It's bilingual, and most people access via phone. And that's where a lot of our information that's coming into the presentation today. This slide gives you the background on older people, just to give you a few sort of details around the areas which are more likely to affect them. So it's important to remember that older people are not a homogenous group. Within the age ranges of older people 65 plus, we're talking about several generations, and the differences in the way that the cost of living crisis is impacting on them varies according to age and obviously intersectionality. Older people are more likely to spend more time at home, so their heating costs are going to be higher, and research shows that only 1/3 of households headed by somebody aged over 65 is living in a property with a energy rating of C or above. Overwhelmingly, the group that has left the labour market since the start of the pandemic is the 50 to 64-year-olds, which represent 90% of those that have left. And the latest intergenerational audit details that those that retire early seldom return to the labour markets, only about 5 to 10% do. Many have left employment due to long-term health conditions, and our own annual survey showed that some left during the pandemic as a result of increased caring responsibilities, and a lot of those haven't been able to go back. Long-term worklessness, of course, has a lot of implications for health and well-being. One of the reasons older people find it harder to stay or get back into the workplace is due to lack of flexible working options. Older workers are more likely to be living with long-term health conditions and are more likely to have caring responsibilities, which is particularly so for women. 31% of people that responded to our recent survey of experiences of people aged 50 and over living in Wales told us that 31% are looking after or giving unpaid help or support to someone. And of that 31%, 55% had increased the amount of care that they're providing in the previous 3 months. The survey was done from February to March. And so we're talking sort of like after the pandemic's ended, long after the issues with lack of access to service before. So people are needing more care and support now than they did prior to the pandemic. Our annual surveys we've been doing since the start of the pandemic do demonstrate that there's increased worries for older people. Cost of living crisis was there. There was always a question around the cost of living and whether people were surviving. And it's gone up year on year on year in terms of people saying that this is one of their main worries for the year ahead. And of the respondents that came through on that, it is highest in the 50 to 64-year-old group. They're the ones that are most worried about what's going to happen with their finances over the next year. This slide shows how, let's go back, the number of inquiries that we've had. It's changed a lot. The numbers have gone up hugely. And the nature of the calls that's coming through is also changing. We're doing as much as we can to help people within our resourcing constraints. As I said earlier, Citizens Advice have seen huge increases in people coming forward. We've seen huge increases too. And like other charities providing advice and information, we're doing everything we can within our resourcing, but I think there's an awful lot more that could be done for a lot of people, not just older people across Wales, if such services had better resourcing to do more. There's so much to do. So that gives a huge increase in the amount of calls that are coming through, but within that, there's some particular areas which are of interest today. So just in last year, we saw a 77% increase in people coming through asking about benefits and how to claim more, whether they're getting their entitlements, everything from pension credits to carers allowance and all the other benefits which are relevant to older people. And there's been a change in what people are saying when they call us. It's quite a shift. So not that long ago, people would call and say, I'm calling you about this, but can you just, while I'm on, can you just do the benefits check, see if I'm entitled to anything? Now more people come through saying, I'm really struggling, I need some more help. Can you help me claim more money? People used to be reluctant to claim, and now that's changed a lot. So we always thought there was an issue with shame and people not understanding that these are their entitlements. But now more people, as I say, are just wanting help because they are that desperate. And we're also seeing a lack of understanding in a lot of people coming through, and the differences between what's available from Westminster benefits and support and what's available in Wales. Some calls indicate that older people haven't claimed for things they're entitled to because they didn't know there was additional help available in Wales. And of those, it seems that a lot of the issues are around having to claim for entitlements through local authorities where you don't pay for council tax and the rest via direct debit, and for those that are digitally excluded. So people have been missing out because they haven't known that it was there, and then they've missed out in some sorts of ways. When we're looking specifically about calls coming through around health and social care, I got our advice team to do a quick check to see what was coming through a few months ago. And this is going to affect health and social care a lot, and how people access it. Huge increase in people coming through saying that they can't afford for the means tested benefits that they have previously been paying for. We've had more calls from people coming through about how they can no longer afford third-party top-ups for payments for care homes. And in recent months, we've had calls coming through saying the care homes contacted us to say that we need to pay more for mum or dad or brother or sister because they're on oxygen and they can't afford the energy and they want us to pay another £30 a week or whatever. And we don't know how we're going to afford that. There's a lot of very, very worried people out there, and this situation is not going to get any better anytime soon, as we know. Linked to that also, we're having more calls coming in asking about community transport. So older people are much less likely to own a car, rely on public services, and as public transport has been reduced through the pandemic and not everything has come back, they're struggling to get out and about, they're struggling to get out for socialisation, and they're struggling to make necessary health and social care appointments too. And what's really worrying our advice team is those that are coming through that aren't eligible for any more support than they're already getting. People that are just above the threshold with finances, and not knowing where to turn once they've spoken to us and realised there isn't anything else available benefits wise. We'll signpost them to charities and services that can help, but there is an awful lot of frustration and concern out there. We've had an awful lot of calls around energy suppliers, where energy suppliers have suddenly shut up direct debits, which can be someone's whole pension, and if the direct debit's gone up, then they haven't got any money to pay anything else. So there's a lot of support that's going to help people understand how they can sort those sorts of things out and how to speak to their energy suppliers. I've already mentioned transport issues and the effects there, so that's a bit of a duplication. Of course, the cost of living crisis, as others have said, is not just, it's not just about the money. There's so many wider things which have a knock-on effect. And the slide from Selina earlier showing all the interconnections was really clear on that. I feel like she's done my job for me here. Particularly, a lot of people do not want to talk about their mental health. Older people specifically are very, very private about such things, but we've had an 840% increase in calls around mental health, people feeling down, not knowing where to turn. And the difficulty that our advice team have had is that there's an awful lot of support out there specifically for older people or where to turn to on those sort of lower ends of mental health rather than the high end sort of scales. 70% increase in people asking about befriending and social activities, because it's been decimated since the pandemic. Oops, slow down again. And people are losing out on those opportunities, in particular after the pandemic. It's so important that those connections continue to be made, and that people are able to maintain their well-being in those sorts of ways. Just to summarise on that sort of area, life is becoming unaffordable. Older people they're not living anymore, they're only existing, is what a lot of what's coming through. We've had calls from people who've been left with no heating when contractors for a grant-funded boiler have disappeared and not come back. We've had calls about micro details of things which people have never called us before about how to, where do they get draft excluders, how do they keep the heat warm here? These are things which have never been coming through in the same sort of ways. And our advice team are working as hard as they can to look at those sorts of things. One of the things that we do each year is our Spread the Warmth campaign. We produce the Winter Wrapped Up Guide. We've just had our quarterly newsletter out, which has all got advice and information on how to stay warm at winter, how to prepare, sorting out your home, where to go for advice, where to go for information, different things you can do, staying healthy, moving, healthy eating, and everything else that can do, which we produce it's on our website, and I'll put some links in the chat later to our information. But we are really concerned about how little we can do in comparison to the amount of help that people need out there at the moment. From an Age Cymru perspective, looking specifically at older people, it's not every older person that is suffering in the same way, as we've already said. There is more targeted support that's needed for those that have been most affected by the cost of living crisis. We want more awareness to be made around priority services, because priority services register can stop people getting cut off from gas and electricity when things have gone wrong. We're working hard to get information out around that. Particularly at UK level, ensuring the triple lock on pensions is maintained and that consideration is taken into account of how pension settlements have reduced over time. What Peter was saying earlier on about people stopping their pension contributions is really quite worrying, because that's going to affect them in the longer term. Pensions aren't worth as much now if you're retiring now as they were, say, 10 years ago. And so how these effects over time are going to affect people is really concerning. So ensuring that pensions are maintained is absolutely vital. Because older people tend to be more digitally excluded and are less likely to be paying everything on direct debit, we'd like more help to ensure that every benefit that comes through around the cost of living crisis is really easy to access, or ideally given automatically to those that are in receipt of these. We know that not everyone's getting the help that they're entitled to. Age Cymru and its partners across Wales have helped people claim £7.5 million over the last year in unclaimed benefits and financial help that they can have. But we also know a huge amount goes unclaimed, and we'd like more to be able to do more in that area. Particularly for older people that are more likely to have health and social care needs, the speed of return after the pandemic of services closer to home is vital. Through our engagement activities throughout the summer and the autumn, we've been hearing from people that are saying we can't even get to the vaccination appointments. It's 2 bus journeys away. We can't get there. We've had to cancel this appointment. We can't get there. We've not been able to do this. And concerns that people have in terms of the ongoing health are getting worse and worse amongst all this crisis. So we'd like an increase in befriending and social opportunities, because those things can really, really help people. I've said very little about carers throughout this, but unpaid carers have been so hard hit during the pandemic and more recently, that the more that can be done to support those, the better. I've included here links to our services, in case anyone wants to refer anybody that they're working with, or just pass it on, because as the slide is going out. But that's about it from me. They're all there. And thank you very much.
Helen, thank you so much, Helen, for that very sobering, again, powerful presentation. We know that the cost of living crisis is having an effect across the life course, but what you've done is really spell out for us the particular implications for older people. And the fact that life is becoming unbearable is really something that as a society and a country, we really should bend all our efforts to improving. And can I ask all those on the call who work in organisations who can signpost and help people make sure that they gain every help they can you please take all the links away and help with that? We turn now to Dan Roberts, who's the Policy and Research Officer for Cwmpas, formerly known as the Wales Cooperative Centre. And Cwmpas believes the economy and society really should work differently, putting people and the planet first. And its mission includes creating a fairer, greener economy, building a more equal society, and making positive change happen. So Dan is going to give us an overview of the work that Cwmpas is undertaking to support communities and the economy. And again, as our other speakers have done, Dan's going to give us the recommendations from Cwmpas that the organisation is putting forward to the UK and Welsh governments. Drosoch i chi, Dan. Croeso.
Hi, diolch yn fawr iawn, John. Diolch yn fawr am y cyfle I fod yma heddiw. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today and talk to you about our work. We're Cwmpas. We're an economic development agency based in Wales. I'll go into further detail about who we are and the support that we provide later. My role in the organisation is Policy and Research Officer, and what I try to do and what I was brought in to do is take the expertise that we have in the organisation of working in communities across Wales, working with communities to create the change that they want to see, and make sure that that's reflected in Welsh Government policy and policy at all levels, to make sure that the most supportive environment is possible for communities to be able to take that on. So if I just introduce who we are first of all, as I'm not sure how well known we'll be. So we're a cooperative development agency. We're a cooperative in our own right, and that's the sort of the history of the organisation. We support cooperatives, we support social enterprises, we support community-led groups. The purpose is working with communities to create that change. So we're formally known as the Wales Cooperative Centre, which maybe people might be aware of, but we rebranded to Cwmpas this year in the year of our 40th anniversary. And the reason we did that is that we wanted our name to be more reflective of the support we provide now. So when we started 40 years ago, we existed basically as a means for miners who were facing unemployment to come together and create cooperatives to avoid unemployment. And there were some successes and some barriers and some learnings that came from that. And from there, we've expanded the services we provide and the type of models that we work in. So social enterprise, community-led groups across a range of different sectors in Wales. And also it was important for us to reflect the fact that we're based across Wales. It's not one centre anymore. We recently, actually last week, announced that we're a fully remote working organisation now, which we think was the right choice. And we wanted that to be reflected in our name as well. So we changed to Cwmpas. So if I just go and give a bit of an overview of the type of projects and services that we provide. So we deliver Social Business Wales, which is the Welsh Government's specialist business support service for social enterprises in Wales. And that also, that includes supporting new start enterprises, so people who come to us wanting to start a social enterprise, and also existing social enterprises and helping them to grow. And then within that, we also have Employee Ownership Wales, which is helping businesses to convert to an employee-owned structure. We also have Digital Communities Wales, and it's been really good to hear how often digital inclusion has been mentioned already in this discussion we're having. It's an issue which has been exacerbated since COVID, and I think it's become more apparent to everyone. But yeah, that's been something that we've been working on for a long time. Digital Communities Wales is the Welsh Government's flagship digital inclusion programme, and we support people to get online in that project. We also have Communities Creating Homes, which is part Welsh Government funded and part funded by Nationwide, looking at community-led and cooperative housing solutions. We also have Community Shares Wales, which is about supporting communities to come together and save local assets or start community-led businesses. And we've also recently started a consultancy arm as well. So in your work today, if you're interested in learning about how you can work with social enterprises, cooperatives, social value more, we'd welcome the opportunity to work with you. So I thought it would be useful just to take a step back at this point and talk about what cooperatives and social enterprises are and the definition. So a cooperative is a business that meets the economic, social and cultural needs of its members. And its members can come from lots of different places. It could be the workers within a business, it could be members of a community, consumers. And the purpose is that the management, ownership and decision-making processes within that business are democratic and member-led, and that we've seen the benefits that can come from that structure. If I then go to a social enterprise, which is a business with a traditional ownership or management structure, but their social, environmental, cultural mission is prioritized to at least the same extent as traditional, profit seeking, and that's embedded throughout the business model. And again, we can see that these models have, tangible impacts and benefits for, well, the multifaceted benefits for members and for workers, but also the wider community. We recently published a guide to building stronger local economies that goes into this in a bit more detail, a bit more sector-specific examples as well. If that's something that you'd be interested in, I'd recommend having a read of that. And the important thing, I think, is that the benefits of these models are proven. It's not just a nice idea. We have the evidence for it. So every 2 years we do the Social Business Wales mapping exercise, and that shows that a higher proportion of these businesses pay the living wage, for example. Profits are reinvested locally. These businesses are really embedded in their communities, and we can see, particularly during times of crisis like COVID-19, these groups, these community groups, and these community-based enterprises really stepped up to the plate during that time and made a really big difference. So the context, I think, of why we've been invited to speak today is that we provide the secretariat for the cross-party group in the Senedd for cooperatives and mutuals, and we discuss the benefits of this model and opportunities for it to grow further. And normally we meet a few times a year, and there's about 30 or 40 people attending, and we have a good discussion, and we can engage politicians, and it's really useful. Earlier this year, a few months ago, we had a meeting on the cost of living crisis, and the level of interest in that event was completely unprecedented. So I'm not sure if you can see that, but we had a limit of about 100 people attending. It reached that limit. We increased it to 150, 200, 250 every single time it was reached. And as we've heard today, this crisis has reached unprecedented scales, and people are desperate to find solutions, and that was really reflected in this event. And we had people attending from a really wide range of organizations and institutions. We had people in the public sector who came and attended and wanted to know what they could do differently to support new cooperative solutions to the crisis. We had communities themselves coming to see what support was available. Social enterprises attending. Yeah, it was a really cross-sector group of people who came to the meeting, and it was really heartening to see that people wanted to know what Wales could do differently. So at the meeting, we heard from Leanne Wood from Community Energy Wales. We heard from Anne Francis from the Cambrian Credit Union in North Wales. And we heard from Hannah Morris from Community Shares Wales, one of our projects. And we heard about, similar to today, the scale of the problems that people are facing in communities across Wales, across different sectors in lots of different ways. And it was a really interesting meeting. So from that meeting, we learned 3 things. And I think the key thing for me is both the short-term impact and the long-term impact of this way of working. In the short term, we heard about how credit unions were adapting their services and coming together and working together to find short-term solutions for their members to get through the crisis, for financial relief. But crucially, we also heard as well about, this isn't just about providing short-term solutions, which are desperately needed to get people through this crisis. It's also about rebalancing these sectors so that we are, as communities and as economies, more resilient to challenges in the future. And that was also, abundantly clear in when we discussed community energy as well. Community projects across Wales, and this is a sector actually that Wales is doing well on. We have a lot to celebrate in terms of the number of community energy projects we have in Wales. And those community projects are obviously producing cheaper energy and more sustainably resourced energy, but they're also working with communities to educate them about the choices they can make. And I'm sure people would agree if we'd 10 years ago had put more time and money and investment into developing this sector further, so we were less reliant on other sources of energy, we'd be in a much better position now. And it's about both that short-term impact and the long-term impact. And similarly for community shares as well, the cost of living crisis is obviously going to be a major issue for businesses as well. The human impact is, as we've heard today, is so stark. But we're also going to have the issue of local businesses, community hubs closing down, and community shares offer a way of solving that. So if we go on to the next section about what do we want to see next, what does Compass think that we can do differently to create that more equal, sustainable economy in Wales that we want to see. So the first thing is about the continuation and development of specialist support. So the fact and the discussion of specialist support is really crucial because we think that obviously the structures of these businesses, their missions, their models means that they're very different from traditional businesses, and we're lucky in Wales that we have this specialist support available to them, and other parts of the world are looking at Wales now to see as an example of what can be done. The funding environment is difficult. So Social Business Wales was EU funded, and after Brexit and everything else, that's become more difficult. So we're lucky the Welsh Government has extended the funding for Social Business Wales, but on a smaller scale. But there are also opportunities that come from that. We're looking at the Shared Prosperity Fund and everything to see how we can work differently to support these social enterprises and this model in sectors across Wales. And we don't just want to patch up and make sure that we can provide the service we've always provided. We want to look for new opportunities and develop this further in new sectors and everything. So the next one is about sustainable funding, and I think this is really important in the context of the NHS, because it was actually really interesting to hear from Samina really talking about the NHS's role within the foundational economy and as an anchor institution. And there's already great things being done, and we want to see that further. If we see more social value procurement in Wales and procurement and contracts that prioritise social value to the same extent, or at least the same extent as economic value, that will be of huge benefit to the sector in Wales. At the moment, we have a quite grant-dependent culture in the sector in Wales, and we want to move to that more commercial and sustainable model. If we then go, and it's something that we can do, and again, Compass has a lot of experience within digital, and it's really good to hear that the extent that digital inclusion has been discussed today, because it is such an important issue, and we have a lot of experience of helping people through that. But there's also, unfortunately, the sector, the community-led cooperative sector and social enterprise sector in Wales is
1 minute.
It is behind, thank you. It's behind in terms of its digital capabilities. compared to Scotland and England, and this is something the sector can do. So it's not just about that policy level, it's also about what the sector can do to support more people in Wales, and digital is something that we can do better, and that's something that we're going to be working on in the future. We've recently announced the Newid project, which is looking at developing this further. And finally, hopefully something that can come across from this presentation is the fact that this model is relevant to a wide range of sectors and a wide range of work. If you look at things that are on the Welsh Government agenda at the moment, social care, as has been discussed today as well, that's a model where cooperative models can be hugely beneficial, and we're working on projects in Ely and Cardiff and Pembrokeshire on that at the moment. Social prescribing is a really important model and an opportunity for Wales, and we've responded to the Welsh Government consultation on that. But also things like the Welsh Government innovation strategy, we want to see social value and a social enterprise approach being embedded in that as well. And then finally, I thought I'd end with, so every year we do the Social Business Wales Awards, and these are just some of the examples of social enterprises that have won awards this year. And these are businesses that operate across Wales in every sector you can imagine. These models aren't just an idea, they are already making a huge impact in Wales. It's a multi-million pound sector, employs thousands of people. It's already having a massive impact, and if there's anything that public institutions and public sector and we as people in our communities can do to support these businesses and these community-led groups, I think that's going to be hugely beneficial to Wales. So yeah, diolch yn fawr iawn am y cyfle I siarad heddiw. Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk today, and it'll be good to carry on this discussion afterwards.
Thank you. Diolch yn fawr eto, Dan. Thank you very much, Dan. Well, that brings to an end 4 very powerful, informative and inspirational presentations given the seriousness of the subject. We've heard how the cost of living crisis is a societal level public health emergency, and it will have short, medium and long-term implications. And we've heard from the use of very big data the impact it's going to have, particularly on people already in poverty. Their lives will worsen and health inequalities will widen. And then we've had a really powerful just synopsis of what it's doing to older people, how their lives are becoming unaffordable and perhaps unbearable. And as a community across Wales, we need to respond to that. And we've heard how Cwmpas is doing its very best in terms of supporting community resilience. So we now have about 20 minutes where we can take questions. So if I can ask the panel, if perhaps they can put their cameras back on. And if I can just ask panel members myself as we get underway, you've all provided such a breadth and depth of data, evidence, research this afternoon. But can you tell us really, very briefly, given we want to get through as many questions, what impact do you think has it had to date on influencing government policy and decisions, both at the UK and Welsh Government level? Could perhaps each of our panel members give one example? And Samina, shall I start with you? How do you think that what Public Health Wales has done has influenced government policy?
Thank you, Jan. I think government's been very keen to hear what we have to say. So I think that in itself is saying a lot. So we've had conversations in terms of sharing our learning. We've talked to different parts of government. They've been very keen to involve us in some of the technical advisory groups whereby we provide evidence. And we've also been able to share findings in terms of cross-party groups as well. So by not cross-party, apologies, but what I mean is cross-government groups, whereby different parts of government are coming together. And I think actually that's the key bit. We can't have bits of government responding separately. It's got to be all together, because this is the cost of living crisis affects every single part of it. So I think that's the key bit which I've taken away in terms of conversations with government. I know that our data is valuable. I know that conversations are being held, and it cuts across all that we do. So there's government representation on a group called Building a Healthier Wales, which is about bringing different sectors together so that we are looking at health well-being for our population, what we can do collaboratively. So I think there's absolutely listening and conversations. In terms of impacts, I'm sure there's a lot going on. I'm going to have a bit of a think about it, Jan, and come back if
Okay.
that's all right.
Yes, Amelia, that's fine. Helen, let me turn to you then. In terms of Age Cymru, how would you say that you're influencing government policy at the moment?
Well, I think we're kind of lucky in Wales that we are closer to our politicians, so we do have a better. It's better in lots of ways than probably what it is for my colleagues in Age UK. Particularly when the cost of living crisis first impacted, all the benefits and help that was there initially was for people on working age benefits, and it's not only us, but it's other people. The office of police, office of the older people's commissioner, worked to say, well, actually, older people have been affected as well. So as a result of that, there have been additional payments for older people in Wales. So that's one area which has helped sort of in the short term. Apart from that, it's ongoing. We know that those avenues are there open to talk to, and Welsh Government is very keen to work with us in lots of ways to make sure that information gets out. For example, when under the priority registers and things like that, when they're sending information out, people get access to our phone number so they can call us for advice. So that's one way that we're helping there.
Thank you, Helen. And Peter, what would you say from the UK government's perspective?
Yeah, so I think the success of getting benefits operated by inflation, I think was, there was lots of sort of talk in the news about going up by earnings or various random statistics. I think holding the government to account for that, I think, was a success. And I think also like the one-off payments and some of the changes to the work allowance and taper rate when they withdrew the £20 a week, I think those we had an effect on. We're going to have a big campaign during next year to actually try and get benefits to an adequate level though. So I think that's going to be where we'll be really trying to pressure government, not just to do these kind of stopgap measures, but I do think we have as a sector helped mitigate some bad things that could have potentially happened. Hopefully next year we'll be able to get some good things to happen instead.
Thank you, Peter. And Dan, you talked about your engagement with politicians in the Senedd and in government. So what, from Compass perspective, has been the most helpful thing so far?
Yeah, I think when we talk about this in Wales, it's important to note that we have world-leading sort of policy and legislation in Wales. New radical things that are happening. The issue is, and it's an issue, in all types of policy, but that implementation gap, and how do we turn that policy and legislation into the different ways of doing things on the ground? And it's a complicated issue. There's loads of different actors at play. There's lots of different people who need to learn about these things and learn about the benefits of these things. And we all have a role in doing that. Compass has a role in doing that. I'm sure everyone on the call has a role in doing that. I think that we all want to see things move a bit quicker, and we want to see lots being done. But we need to be confident in ourselves and the policy that's being developed, and then work together as a way of seeing that make real change on the ground.
Thank you, Dan. Now we do have a question from one of our delegates, Judith Pritchard. Judith, you've been patiently putting your hand up there. Would you like to put your camera on and come off mute and ask the panel your question?
Yes, I'm sorry to say, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I've put my camera on. I'm a bit reluctant because I've got my dressing gown on because it's a bit cold. Yeah, there are two things I wanted to say really, and one of them was there's been a lot of emphasis on poverty and how people are suffering and what a terrible thing cost of living crisis is, which it is. And I'm a well-off pensioner, so I do hope that people who heard the Age Cymru presentation do realise that some of us are not touched at all by the cost of living crisis, because we've got good pensions, we've been thrifty all our lives, and we've got savings. I personally think that taxes for higher rate earners, or even, well, I don't quite know how you'd eliminate the people who are just above the cut-off point for not paying tax, how you help those. But I am an advocate of putting taxes up in order to be able to spread equality. But the thing that really worries me about what's been said is that there seems to be little emphasis on helping people to help themselves, what they themselves can do. For instance, if you take food, people running out of food is dreadful, but has anybody done a study, and perhaps Joseph Rowntree has anybody done a study and an analysis of what people are actually spending their food money on? Because I've noticed in supermarkets, you've still got an entire aisle of different potato crisps. So presumably people are buying them, and they're no good at all from a public health point of view. Most people traditionally have bought too much and thrown some of it out. And from a public health point of view, a lot of people are overweight. So I think, and probably eating too much and too much of the wrong things. So I think there should be more education for how to exist in a situation in which the standard of living is going to go down, is bound to go down. Climate change requires it to go down. So, you know, that's one thing that I think is important. The same thing with energy, using energy. Are we using energy intelligently? Well, probably not. I think there should be a very, councils, etc., should have a very, put taxes up and spend the money on insulation of poorly insulated houses. Sorry, I've kept on.
No,
gone on a bit.
There we are. Thank you very much, Judith, for that question. But the essence of it is really, what are we doing in Wales to help people help themselves? And you referenced the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. So, Peter, shall I come back to you in respect of Judith's point there?
Yeah, so I think there's two things. One is basically we've looked at what the cost of essentials are, and the benefit rate is way below that. So whatever choices you make, you still can't afford enough of the food if you're just on universal credit. So in a way, that kind of that yawning kind of gap between universal credit and a decent living standard is designed into the system. So it's not like in somebody's ability to do it. And I think, but your main point about, is there a role for government to improve these kind of things through sort of campaigns and so forth, I think is really important. So, you know, when you talk about housing insulation and so forth, you can't really reasonably expect people to take on a big loan to do wall insulation or anything like that. You need something centralized to actually help you to do that. So I think there is a bit about how can you help yourself. But we do see lots of people struggling who are in work and are already doing sort of the required hours on universal credit and so forth. So I think there's probably a role for that, but there's still a role for the state to step up as well.
Thank you very much, Peter. Do any other panel members want to answer Judith's question there? I'm desperate to get through as many questions as we can, and we've got two people who are waiting to ask questions. Any other panel member want to come in there?
Yeah, I'll just come in on that if that's okay, Jan, because
Yes,
I've already put a link in our chat to arrange, because we have an awful lot of fact sheets and information which are there for people to help themselves. And as Judith said, yes, there is a lot that people can do for themselves. A lot of our work is around helping people to do things for themselves. We provide information rather than advice as well as support. So a lot is ongoing in that sort of sense, which is what I'd say. And it's also lovely to hear from a lady that is okay with her pension, because obviously from our perspective, we hear the worst side from people contact us when things are going wrong and not when things are going right. It'd be lovely to hear from people when things are going right as well, but obviously we get the worst of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. That's really helpful there. And just point delegates as well to the information in the chat bar. So Sharon, shall I turn to you, please? Penanda, and then we'll come to Tashwin afterwards. Sharon, over to you.
Hi, yes, thanks. I think it's just really interesting to hear different perspectives. I'm sat here with a scarf around me, and I'm sort of between, well, not even the 55 age group at the moment, but I'm still sort of really hesitant about putting my heating on. I think one of the things that we're doing in our area in RCT is, rather than having food banks, we do have food banks, but we also have food pantries. And what we find with that, with a food bank, people are given some sort of tins and different food items, which they don't always use. And although they can donate those back to and to the food bank. In our area, they're accessing more food pantries and opening more food pantries where people are able to access sort of fresh fruit, veg, because they have like a market stall, so they're able to get fresh fruit and veg from the supermarket. And one of the things that they include in there is they print out recipe cards for just basic recipes like spaghetti bolognese or pasta, basic recipes. Because I know one of the things in school now is, years ago we had to take home economics and learn how to cook, but I think that's something that doesn't exist sort of in schools now, which is a real shame. But it's just providing people, you said how people can help themselves, it's just providing those sort of opportunities for people. I know there's a lot of funding in our area for the community hubs and the warm hubs now, where people can come and access that. So one of the options is that, you can have cookery classes there where people are able to come along, make the items, make the food dishes, and then obviously take those home with them. So that's something that's happening in our area, and which I think is, really good, because you're using you're contributing to the zero waste for food, which we do all throughout. A lot, admittedly, I do the same, not if I can help it, but and then it's also preparing people and allowing them to develop those skills then in cooking. One of the things that we do find is that people accessing benefits in one of the places, one of the food banks I was accessing, was that they're actually giving out SIM cards now, because people can't afford to use a mobile phone, to even ring the benefits agency. And they're not able to use only have simple phones, so they're not able to access online services. But for universal credit, you have to have that online service. And I think that's where that digital communities comes in. But, years ago, you could go into the job centre and access the computers there, but that was taken away. So I think we need to look more about, the sort of digital aspect, but also like mobile phones and Wi-Fi in sort of places like job centres, again, so people can access those.
I think, Sharon, you've made a number of really important points there, very much focusing on community resilience, but also making sure that no one's left behind. And the digital exclusion agenda is a really important one there. I mean, Dan, did you want to come in there in terms of this whole concept of community resilience and how communities can be helped to withstand these pressures?
Yeah, definitely. Really sort of heartening comment there, because I think, I think the important thing to remember is that social enterprises, for example, we know that they're overrepresented in the areas that are sort of underperforming economically compared to the rest of Wales. And one of the key benefits of the social enterprises and cooperatives are that they're embedded in their communities. At a time of crisis, they're not going to close down because it's not profitable anymore. They're not going to go to somewhere else where there's a better financial offer. They exist to support their communities. And not only that, they have access to human capital and networks that are absolutely vital to answering the problems that are in communities and supporting those models like community hubs. And there's so many different examples in Wales already. That is a really important way of building community wealth.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dan. I think we're going to have just time for one quick question, and it's from Tash Wynn, and Tash has put it in the chat bar there. Natasha works for Marie Curie, and she's asking the panel about reflections on systematic or systemic interventions that could improve benefit access and take up. And in the chat bar, she set out there how people who find themselves sadly in a terminal illness position who are working age can be worse off because of the benefit system. So can I just ask panel members to conclude by giving us their reflections on systemic interventions that can start? And Helen, shall I start with you from Age Cymru? What systemic improvement would help, do you think?
I referred earlier on in my presentation to how it's more difficult if you are digitally excluded or aren't paying your council tax by direct debit to get those sort of payments and things that you need. So that's just like one area, and I know Tash is talking about a much wider area, but if those sorts of routes could be streamlined and made much easier, that would help so many more people. The delays themselves, particularly for somebody with a terminal illness, are absolutely devastating. So speeding up those sorts of things, improving awareness around what is available so that people can get that help earlier. That's systemic change that could happen. The social prescribing element, which is coming in, would also help a lot with that. Getting the information straight away on how to get things would help. So that sort of changes is what we'd really like to see, because people do want to help themselves. They need that help as soon as they can get it, rather than much further down the line with those issues there.
Thank you. Diolch, Helen. Peter, any final reflections from you on this?
Yes, I think the Scottish Government have got their disability benefits, where dignity, fairness and respect are sort of the three words they want to kind of describe the benefit system as. And I think that just having that sort of that mindset would be really helpful here, because it does sometimes feel like you're on trial and trying to sort of justify why you need these benefits, whereas, you know, in the situation you've outlined, it's clear that the person does need the benefits. So just having that mindset about dignity, fairness and respect throughout the system, I think would be a game changer.
Thank you. Samina, any quick reflections?
Yeah, thank you. There's an opportunity here to sort of use the principles from making every contact count. So, you know, public health doesn't belong to public health professionals, it belongs to us all. So we've got this principle of, you know, say if a healthcare professional, somebody in the health system sees somebody who smokes, you use that opportunity to say, do you want to stop? And here also, you know, we can use those principles to sort of look out for people who are experiencing poverty, experiencing difficulty in their lives, and signpost, because so many people who are vulnerable are in contact with services, with health and care services. So I think there's a huge opportunity there.
Thank you, Samina. And Dan, very quickly before I need to close the webinar.
Yeah, so I think because people have spoken about digital exclusion, I'll just draw people's attention to Digital Inclusion Alliance Wales, which is a group that we're involved in. It's an opportunity for people to come together and network cross-sector way about digital inclusion and what can be done to support that in Wales. So if you'd like any more information on that, please get in touch and I'd be happy to help.
Thank you. Diolch, Dan, and diolch yn fawr i'n panel this afternoon. So sadly, I have to bring the webinar to an end now. I'm sure that we could have talked for at least an hour or so, but we've covered such a lot of ground on such an important topic, and we could not have picked a more topical and a really pivotal sort of subject matter for the ending of the Welsh Confederation's Wellbeing series this year. And I'm certain it's one that we will come back to in 2023. So diolch yn fawr i'n trefnwyr. So thank you very much to our organisers. That's Nesta, Laurie, Liv and Sandra. Diolch yn fawr eto and cyflwynwyr, Samina, Peter, Helen and Dan. And diolch I chi gyd am ymuno â ni p'nawn 'ma. And thank you all very much for joining us this afternoon. Please look at the slides, look at the information as it comes through in the next week or so, and we hope that you will join us again for the webinar series in 2023. Diolch yn fawr iawn, hwyl am nawr, Nadolig llawen a blwyddyn newydd dda. Happy Christmas and New Year to everyone. Hwyl am nawr, bye for now.